Hello and welcome to No Spin. I'm Nidhi Razdan. There have been a series of high-profile exits from the Congress party over the last few years as disillusionment with the party leadership has deepened and the Congress has shown few signs of doing any serious introspection. One of the Congress's most senior leaders, former Union Minister and Lok Sabha MP Manish Tewari, also appears to be unsettled. On the Agnipath scheme for the armed forces, for instance, the Congress has publicly distanced itself from Mr Tewari at least twice in the last few weeks. Mr Tewari supports the scheme, which he says is a genuine reform for the armed forces. In fact, he was the only opposition MP in a parliamentary panel who did not sign a letter seeking the withdrawal of the Agnipath scheme just this week. Is this a sign of larger disaffection? Has the Congress really learnt any lessons? And is it really committed to the changes that it spoke about at its recent conclave in Udaipur? Manish Tewari joins us exclusively on NDTV this evening. Thank you very much for joining us, Manish Tewari. Let me first ask you about why, you decided not to sign that letter on the Agnipath scheme in that parliamentary panel on defence. It really stood out and made headlines because you were the only opposition MP who didn't do so.
Well, thank you, Nidhi, for having me on your show. It's always a pleasure to be on this show. I like the word unsettled, quote unquote. But unfortunately, sorry to disappoint you, but that's not the case. I have explained my position on the Agnipath/Agniveer scheme ad nauseum, including writing a 1,000-word piece in one of the English dailies. When I look at defense reforms or when I look at national security, I try and look at it from as non-partisan a perspective as possible. And in my limited understanding, the quest for a leaner and a younger defense force goes back all the way to 1989, when it was first recommended by the Arun Singh Committee on Higher Defence Management. Subsequently, the Kargil Review Committee in 1999, the group of ministers in the year 2000, then the Standing Committee of Defence in the year 2006 and 7 in its 22nd report, the Naresh Chandra Committee, which was set up by the UPA government to look at national security issues in 2011. All of them have recommended that the age of the armed forces, especially the Indian Army, which is currently at about 32, needs to be brought down. And in my humble estimation, of course, the government does not admit it in so many words, this particular reform measure or initiative which has been taken would undoubtedly lower the age profile. More importantly, it would right-size the armed forces, because if you...
Of course, Manish Tewari, merits of the scheme aside, the reason why your views are making headlines is because they are at such a dissonance with your party's official line. So much so that they've issued public statements now saying that this is not the party's point of view. As a former union minister, as a senior member of parliament, don't you think that raises eyebrows, that things are not okay?
Well, in a democracy, Nidhi, I think as a member of parliament, I am definitely entitled to a point of view, which I think is both germane and constructive. It's another matter that my party may have a different point of view. Possibly they are able to discern something which I am not in my limited understanding of this issue. But the little that I have read and the little that I have understood over the past 2 decades of following strategic affairs and national security lends me to conclude that this is an initiative which should be allowed to play itself out. Not only would the profile be younger, but it would also rationalize defense pensions in a in the medium term, and more importantly, I think given the technological changes which have taken place in the last decade and a half, which has led many armed forces all across the world, including the People's Liberation of Army of China, in order to rationalize their force structures, is possibly the right way to go.
So, Manish Tewari, you were of course part of that group called the G23. That's what the media called a number of Congress leaders like Kapil Sibal, Ghulam Nabi Azad, yourself, even Shashi Tharoor became a part of it later, that had called for reforms within the Congress and some serious introspection about what was happening within the party. Where do you stand on that today? I mean, post Udaipur Chintan Shivir in May, do you think that the changes that you were seeking and the kind of reform that you were seeking in the Congress, is that happening?
First of all, Didi, allow me to make it extremely explicit that my stance with regard to Agnipath or Agniveer has nothing to do with the so-called G23. I mean, these are in two separate buckets altogether. As I explained to you earlier, when I look at national security, I try and look at it from as non-partisan perspective as possible. Number two, coming to the question which you raised, we have articulated our concerns, we've reiterated them, and currently as we speak, there is an organizational election process which is playing itself out in the Congress party. It is supposed to fructify in the month of August, September, and therefore we do hope that through this electoral process, some of the concerns that we had raised and which we have articulated, and some of the members in fact raised it again repeatedly, those concerns would somehow find reflection in this process which is playing itself out.
What is your biggest concern right now?
Well, the biggest concern is that the idea of India that we all grew up to believe in, that idea of India has been under a constant assault, now going back 8 years. And therefore, the defense of that idea of India, the reiteration of that idea of India, which calls for quote-unquote ideologically robust opposition, is the need of the hour, and that's the principal concern.
So you believe that at the moment the Congress is not ideologically robust? Do you believe that it's kind of wavering on where it stands ideologically?
Well, I did not say that. Those are your words. All I'm saying is that at a point in time, when you find that the founding idea of India is under a challenge, and it is under a serious challenge, in fact, you almost feel as if the logic of partition is being validated 7 decades down the line in India. There is a need to stand firm and to re-articulate those values in order to re-emphasize those values, because they are not only the founding values of the Indian National Congress, but they are also the founding values on which this republic stands. And those are the values which were incorporated.
Sure, but what does the Congress need to reclaim the narrative is the question. I'm asking you this question on a day when we're hearing that Rahul Gandhi has flown abroad for yet another personal trip again. I think this is his 5th vacation abroad this year. As a Congress leader, how do you feel about that? I mean, there's so many of you all clamoring within the party for him to take over again. Is he really ready to do that?
Well, first of all, I'm not aware whether Mr. Gandhi is in India or he has gone abroad, and if he has done so, he must be having valid reasons for doing so. Be that as it may, as I was earlier stressing and re-emphasizing, that that ideological, philosophical construct which underpins the grand old party is something which needs to come out in its entirety, in its full bloom, because eventually
no, but are you saying in a sense there's a leadership vacuum, which is why you're not able to get control of the narrative the way the BJP is? Would you admit that there needs to be a shake-up right at the top?
Well, I think it's not about getting control of the narrative, because, that's really a very pedestrian way of looking at it, if I could use that word. I think the challenge is much larger, the challenge is much greater, and if you allow me to go back a little in time, you see, in 1947, post the partition
No, Manish, don't go back to 1947. I go back to it later. I'm simply asking you, does the Congress, really need to look at a drastic shake-up of its leadership right at the top? Yes or no? As someone who has seen your own colleagues exit the party one by one, and you know that not everybody is doing it because, you know, they have only personal ambitions. Many of them have felt ignored, sidelined, not taken for granted. What do you think the party needs to do?
Well, the short answer to that is that there is an election process which is playing itself out currently. And those who feel that they have concerns with regard to the issues that they articulated obviously need to take advantage of this process and see whether they can use it in order to ensure that their point of view gets reflected in a efficacious manner.
Should a non-Gandhi be Congress president, Manish Tewari?
Well, you see, again, I don't want to reduce everything to a television binary, whether, you know, it is this or it is that. I don't think it's as simple as that. It's not only about an individual which television loves to make it out to be. I think the challenge is graver, it is deeper. It requires the collective energies of all those people who are committed to these founding values, and only if we are able to, as I said earlier, reignite these values, would we be able to politically also make a difference and be able to arrest the slide which you keep talking about and referring to?
Well, you're candid to say that it's a much graver and a deeper problem that goes beyond which individual should lead the Congress. A few months ago, and I'm quoting you, this was around the time of the Punjab election, you said, "I will not leave the Congress party, but if someone wants to push me out of the party, then that's a different matter altogether. I've given 40 years of my life to the Congress." Has someone been trying to push you out?
Well, in the sense, obviously, if the statement was made, it was made in a certain context. And therefore, I stand by each and every word of that statement, which I had articulated possibly in the February of 2022. And and what I was attempting to say then, and I would repeat it now, that I and people like me have spent every waking moment of their adult lives in the service of the Congress party. And therefore, when you see that the values for which you have contributed your entire adult existence, they are not getting upheld in the manner in which they should be upheld, obviously that causes anguish, that causes pain, and that also gives you impetus to rededicate yourselves for the defense of those values.
So who did that? Who's not upholding your values in the party?
It's again, Nidhi, not a question of who is not upholding the values. The fact is that those particular founding constructs which used to find resonance with the people, unfortunately are not finding the same resonance for a variety of reasons. So first of all, by going into the reasons why they are not finding that resonance, and then how to sort of resurrect it and ensure that it finds that resonance is the way forward. So it's not about individuals. I think it's something far more systemic. It's something far more institutional. And therefore, when we talk about, let us say, reform, we are not talking about individual predilections. We are not talking about our ambitions and aspirations.
You're talking about a systematic overhaul of the party.
We are talking about a systemic renewal which is important not only for the Indian National Congress, but is equally important for this country, because any democracy can only survive not only if you have a government, but more importantly, if you have an extremely robust opposition.
So, Manish, last question. Are you still part, you're still part of the Congress, but will you remain part of the Congress?
Well, I think that question is a non sequitur, because I have said this repeatedly, that it's now been 42 years. And so therefore, if after 42 years, I have to answer a question whether I would remain with a particular institution, I think that insults both my dignity and my sense of self-esteem.
So yes or no? I'm still going to ask.
Well, I think I've given you a full answer. So therefore, there's nothing more to be said to that.
So Manish Tewari is not on his way out of the Congress. You're not looking at maybe the Aam Aadmi Party or other political options?
Well, Nidhi, I think, again, to sort of reduce everything down to the fact that you are disgruntled, you're disillusioned, that's why you say X or you say Y, and you're looking at a pathway out or you're looking at an exit, again insults the entire contribution which many of us have made to this institution. And it's not me alone. It's millions and millions of people around the country, people who worked with us in the NSUI, in the News Congress, people who dedicated themselves to the defense of this idea of India, which is what impelled us to join the Indian National Congress in the first place. And so therefore, to really reduce it to that, little zero, that it is only about you and your so-called unfulfilled ambitions, I don't think does justice to our 40 years.
But there's nothing wrong with ambition in politics. That's part of politics, and that's why I ask you that.
Ambition.
That's why I ask you a simple yes or no. Are you going to stay on in the Congress? Would you consider an alternative political option if the reforms in the party didn't materialize the way you hoped?
So therefore, let me answer that straight off the bat. You're absolutely correct. There's nothing wrong with ambition, but I think, at least in my case, there is something beyond just personal ambition, and what is beyond that personal ambition is a belief in some values and ideals, which at least I have held dear for the past 4 decades. And I think eventually you have to make up your mind. Why are you in public service? Are you in public service only for self-aggrandizement, which quote unquote means ambition in the terminology in which that you used it? Or is it beyond yourself and in the service defense of certain things that you believed in?
All right.
I think that's the difference.
All right. So, Manish Tewari, you've clearly raised a lot of concerns about the way the Congress is run institutionally. You've talked about the systemic changes, the deeper problems, and that it's not about individuals alone, but about having a complete overhaul. So, you have expressed concerns on that as you continue to maintain that your views on Agnipath, on national security issues, will be as per your conscience and what you feel is right, even if it's not the party line. Thank you very much for joining us on NDTV today.
Wonderful, Nidhi. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Manish. Well, interesting. Manish Tewari, as I said, a former union minister, a member of parliament, one of the senior leaders of the party. And I used the word unsettled, which he laughed off right at the beginning. But it's well known that Manish Tewari hasn't been quite settled. And that's why he talked about the fact, and he repeated today that he's very much a congressman. But if somebody kicks him out of the party, well, that's, something that's different altogether. Tavleen Singh, Sanjay Jha joining us this evening. Kapil Madan, who is the national spokesperson of the Youth Congress, is also joining us. Tavleen Singh, what did you make of Manish Tewari's words? I mean, he repeated that, that there is a sense of anguish when the party doesn't listen to or uphold the values that you have upheld for so many decades. Is there a sign here? Is there a clear signal coming from him?
I found actually that very interesting what he said about the values that the Congress party has stood for, which really are the values of the Constitution, which is India is a liberal democracy. It's not meant to be, a Hindu Rashtra, and there have been in the past 8 years very serious attempts to turn it into one. But what he didn't admit is that instead of standing up for those values, we have seen the leaders of the Congress party actually being sucked into the Hindutva narrative. So, Rahul and Priyanka Gandhi constantly in some temple or the other. Mrs. Gandhi used to go to temples, but also to mosques and gurdwaras and the whole, whatever you needed, religion there was of that moment. What we've seen is that the Congress party's top leadership is not standing for those values. And not only are they not standing for them, they have made sure that anyone who tries to stand for them is thrown out of the party.
So you're saying they're confused. They're kind of trying to be a B team of the BJP, soft Hindutva, forgetting what they actually stand for.
Absolutely. And I'm also saying that it really is time for the dynasty to become the kind of, the deities of the party or whatever, to be somewhere as the sort of in the background and allow the party to rebuild itself without them, because, you know, the reason why they were given this kind of importance was because they could bring in the votes. Now,
Right.
we've seen very clearly in the past 8 years that the Gandhi name doesn't have that currency anymore. And there are plenty of very sincere leaders in the Congress party all the way down the line who need to be, there are young people who want to actually stand against what's going on. You know, I mean, there are plenty of people who don't want India to be a Hindu Rashtra, but who is there to, where do they go?
So Kapil Madan, I just want to ask you that you're a young Congress leader. You've now been appointed spokesperson of the Youth Congress. And, you know, till yesterday, the Congress was trying to firefight its way in Goa, trying to prevent a split. And, you know, that drama isn't entirely over, by the way. It might have been kind of, put on the back burner for now. But Rahul Gandhi is not here. He's gone abroad again. You guys want him to take over as party president again. Can I please ask you why? Why do you want that? He doesn't really seem to be interested in being a 24/7 politician.
So Nidhi, one thing, we need to understand very, very clearly that who decides who will be the leader. It is the, worker of the party. It is the workforce. I mean, no one from the outside can decide who will be the leader or who will be leading a particular set of people. Now, it is for the Congress party, and rather it is the Congress worker, the workforce, who will stand, who profess and who propagate the ideology that the Congress stand for. They are the people who are going to decide who will be the leader. I mean, we can't decide that who, on TV shows, whether Mr. Gandhi should be leading or someone else should be leading. It is, I think, the party has a board. It is it has a working committee, and the decision. Let us leave the decision, which is the internal democratic setup of the Congress party. They will decide who will lead.
No, sure. But I mean, I'm asking you that at a time, when you see the BJP in politics 24/7, and the man you want as your leader keeps going abroad on a personal holiday. He was just in Europe a few weeks ago. He's gone again for at least till the end of this week. When is he here?
One thing, let me first raise an objection here. Do you have his agenda of the visit? Why is he visiting? So the point is that we are basically trying to speculate. Now, if you'll ask any time, whenever the country was facing any kind of issues, we saw in Rafale, we saw in the farmers' protest, it was Mr. Gandhi who was at the forefront, and he was basically trying to take, the issues that, are important for the public. We saw during the Pegasus also. We saw in the Pegasus also. No, not on Twitter.
The only time your party has come out onto the streets is when he was being questioned by the ED. You all don't come out onto the streets when there's price rise in the way that you came out for him, courting arrest.
Nidhi, perhaps you were not there when the farmers' protest was happening. Mr. Gandhi was on the road with the farmers, and the Congress party
one day
was agitating. Well, that's well. I mean, again, I would like to say, please correct the facts before making a statement. You're a responsible journalist. In fact, the entire Congress party,
so it's perfectly okay for him to keep going abroad. It's okay.
So
when is the last time Amit Shah went abroad, Kapil Madan?
Nidhi ji,
for a holiday?
Nidhi ji, I don't have Pegasus. I don't keep a spy watch on maybe Mr. Amit Shah or maybe Mr. Modi. So I can't say when he was or on what or for what purposes he is traveling anywhere. We don't have that kind of neither. This is the politics.
Okay, so the question here, Sanjay Jha, is the Congress listening to voices like Manish Tewari, who are clearly sending out signals that look, everything is not okay. It's clearly not okay. I'm still here, but obviously it's a matter of time before they're pushed over the edge, unless they course correct. What's it going to take to do that, Sanjay?
Well, Nidhi, I think first and foremost, the Congress party has to realize that the country has expectations from the party. That even if you're in the opposition, there's no need to feel ashamed and embarrassed. In fact, I believe in any democracy, the opposition, the leading opposition, despite only having 52 seats, is like a shadow government. You need to have an ambition. You need to have an aggression to say, okay, listen, I'm the alternative, waiting for an opportunity to come back. And as Tavleen rightly pointed out, it's not just the sectarian, communal combustible environment we have. The government has been a disaster on economy and several other fronts where it's about democracy and the liberty of the citizens and the health of our institutions. To come to Manish's question, I was hearing your conversation with Manish. I need to make a public disclosure. He is a very dear friend of mine. He's one of the people I'm really close to in the Congress party. Manish has actually been extremely miffed and disappointed, and I don't blame him. On the Agnipath issue, for example, I disagree with him too. And I do believe, however, that he has a right, because he's one of those few people who does a deep dive into a subject. He's written a book recently, I think many people have read it, on national security, the deep state, and overall in terms of the other parameters of our foreign policy. So he can differ on the Agnipath scheme, and I think Jairam Ramesh was equally correct as a party head to promptly say that it was his personal view. But in a democracy, I, for example, may not agree with Congress's view on the farmer protest. I, for example, supported the farm bills. Now, this is what democracy is all about. I believe in India, this whip, where an individual can have a different intellectual standpoint, and that is kind of made subservient to the larger political narrative of the party, is not good for inner democracy. Whether it's the BJP, Congress, or any other party, I really don't care. But the question you asked is so relevant, that politics is about optics. Now, I respect Rahul, and he may have certain compulsions to go abroad, but remember that politics is about perception, is about optics. And as my friend Kapil mentioned, if you make a disclosure on your travel plans, it just makes things a lot more transparent. My experience in politics is this, that if you enter public life, you lose the right to the luxuries an ordinary citizen has. I mean, that's why you're in the game, right? The rules change. You do not then begin to say this is private and this is public. Sure, some things are private, but your travel plans, who you meet, what you do, I mean, you live in a goldfish bowl. And I think the Congress needs to wake up to that reality. Manish, I believe, is a voice of reason, and we have lost a lot of good leaders. I also know that Manish is extremely disturbed about where India is headed.
Right. And I think that's the point. I think that when you have leaders like Manish Tewari who are voices of reason, and if the Congress can't listen to those and it's more of the same as far as the party's function is concerned, that, then one wonders whether there were any lessons learned in the Chintan Shivar or not. But I'm out of time today. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us. Interesting to hear from Manish Tewari today. After a long time, he has spoken out not just on Agnipath, but his larger relationship with the Congress party as well. That's it for the moment. Goodbye.